And with no further ado, I will hand it off. Congratulations on the publication, Stephanie, and I will hand it off to my friend Ben to engage you in what I'm sure is going to be a really fascinating discussion, and hopefully we'll be able to open it up after we get going. Thank you both.
Okay, thank you, Matthew. So yeah, Stephanie, I'll just echo what Matthew said. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be able to talk to you about this new book, and thanks for taking the time to do it. And for anyone joining us who has not had time to look at the book, and I'm sure by the end of this you'll want to own one, but I'll just offer a very brief description. So this is a collection of mostly shorter lyrics, remarkably varied in topic, in tone, and in technique. In formal terms, there are stanzaic poems, there's free verse, there's creative translations of classical authors, such as Sappho and the French symbolist poet Paul Verlaine. There's even some examples of concrete poetry. And the subject matter is also extremely various. There's a fabulous ode to the pickle bar at a Jewish delicatessen. There's an expression of gratitude to the unnamed or unknown creator of the Holly Hobby wishing well game. For those of anyone out there who's a child of the 70s. There is a moving elegy for the criminally underrated pop musician Keith Girdler.
Yes! Oh my God, you know Blue Boy. No one knows Blue Boy. My day is made. Oh my God. I am completely crushed.
It's an amazing poem. And there's even a loving tribute to the author's dog. Some of the
some great Blue Boy. I'm going to post a link to some Blue Boy songs in the chat.
Yeah, no, people should know Blue Boy.
Yes,
some of the poems reminisce and reflect on personal experience. Some offer witty interpretations of works of contemporary popular culture. There's a poem called Frozen is the most trans movie ever, for example. But the varieties of mood and feeling, for me, were less a matter of form and subject than they are of voice. There are poems here written from the perspective of cabbage white butterflies. There's poems from the perspective of aeroplanes, taxidermied sparrows, umbrellas, whales. All my favorite units of punctuation get to speak in their own voices. So poems that raise the question for all of you about whether you might identify more as a quotation mark or parentheses or a question mark, an exclamation mark, or perhaps even a Dickensian dash. I personally identify strongly as a semicolon, I think, and maybe we'll get a chance to talk about that.
I hope so.
There are also poems written in the voices of various superheroes. Several X-Men make appearances, Nightcrawler, Dazzler, and Kitty Pryde. And of course, we hear from mermaids. So Stephanie, thanks again for being here. You agreed to read actually for some of the poems for today. And I thought maybe we should just begin with the first one in the collection, the title poem, We Are Mermaids, and then maybe perhaps say a little bit more about why the collection begins there.
Yeah, if it's not too long. We are mermaids. The salt of the ocean is always the salt of tears, melancholy, but at the right dilution or concentration, life-giving. It has been there since before the beginning of tragedy, when what would become us was just trying to get through the day. We know the consistent waves as they ride fortune's helical gears, sacrificing their poise for their careers. Need not be the only mode of living. Look down. The thermophiles sip at the fumaroles, whose sulfur steam would kill a human being. They love it here. And the mottled, diffident, ray-finned fish known as zooarchids or eel pout, all shrugs and S-curves, choose to nose along the floor of the rough world. They're both predators and prey, with gills and wide-set eyes instead of a face. You don't have to be useful. You are not required to come up with something to say. You can spend your life benthic or brackish, subsisting and even thriving where a fingertip comes away saline and still refreshing, exploring the estuary, the submerged lip and congeries of overlapping shores on the green black water, the harbor, the bay. You can live with your doubt. That's why it's yours. Some of us are going to be okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So if it isn't too much like shoveling the glimpse into the ditch of what it means, could you say a little bit about why this is the first poem in the title poem of the collection, why the mermaid voice is the one that you chose to foreground in this way?
Yeah, so the idea of mermaids and of collectivity, not large scale social collectivity necessarily, but like a friend group or like a set of people who support one another, really that idea, I hope, holds together the collection, because I mean, it's a trans collection. I'm trans, it's trans, it's got a bunch of trans stuff. Apparently cis people like it too. If you're cis, don't let that stop you from enjoying it. But it does have trans identity stuff in it. And it, in particular, sort of the last full length I did, Advice from the Lights, was kind of a coming out book. And Advice from the Lights was, hey, I grew up and now I'm an adult and I'm trans and where is everybody? And this book is Here You Are. It is a book about queer and trans community and solidarity and sort of support and care and other kinds of support and care as well. And mermaids are a very familiar trans feminine symbol, and also a symbol of, you know, girly or feminine or femme identity more generally, and of not quite fitting in. Mermaids don't quite fit in anywhere. And at the same time, they try to move around in more than one world, which a lot of the figures in this collection are doing. They pass between water and land, high culture and low culture, whatever the heck that is, household and public life or the world, a kind of space of fan knowledge and secret meetings and Easter eggs, in a wider world where nothing can be assumed about what people know. And of course, between adulthood and, you know, not adulthood, childhood or teenage-ness, or, you know, something more fun with fewer responsibilities. So, you know, mermaids, we the readers, we trans girls, we, my friends and I, come together to try to live in two worlds and take care of each other, and are simultaneously super adaptable because we have to be, and misfits.
That's
A lot. And there's also a global climate change thing, right? The waters are rising. So if we can learn to live like mermaids, maybe we will be able to, you know, have our grandchildren live in Boston.
in that context, you know, the learning about the thermophiles and the fumaroles, which it's, you know, I think it's probably in the context of discussions of climate change that I'd even heard what those words mean, and they go by, and it's almost Wallace Stevens way here. I feel like they have that fabulously fabulously sounding, searched for word feel. Maybe you should say a little bit more of that, but maybe not everyone will perhaps know what a thermophile sipping at a fumarole is. Could you say where that image came from?
Thermophiles are living organisms that tolerate or seek out extremely high temperatures. And a fumarole is a place that's a thermal vent or hole that is open to the fumes, that's how you remember it, of the hot rock that is buried far under the crust of the earth. So toxic superheated gases bubble up from these things, and the ones that are undersea, you find thermophiles living there and doing something called chemosynthesis, which means that instead of getting their energy to live on from sunlight, photosynthesis, or from processing decaying matter, or from eating living matter, they process the super hot sulfur compounds that come out of these fumaroles. and they have a way of living that we couldn't really do, and that was only recently discovered in terms of, I think it's been a few decades since the thermophilic organisms were discovered by undersea probes, and they're really cool, and they're there to show that there are just many ways to live and survive and have a culture. And then on the other hand, there are many ways to be endangered. I mean, part of the way that poem works, and part of the way the collection works, is I'm trying to live with the two truths that some of us really will be okay, and some of us won't be. And you can look at how comfortable you are and how prepared you are and what resources you have, psychological, financial, material, cultural, and give yourself chances, but you never know.
Well, you've anticipated my second question, actually. Right here in my notes, I wanted to talk about that last line. You write when actually it's a rhyme that you end on, right?
Yeah,
the harbor, the
I love
bay.
rhyme. I love
You can
rhyme.
live with your doubt. That's why it's yours. Some of us are going to be okay. So bay and okay brings the poem to its sort of rhyming
Yeah, there's
close.
a chain of rhymes. Yeah.
And I was just so it's an affecting last line, but I can't help hearing it, thinking that it means that if some of us are going to be okay, then some of us aren't, or some of us are struggling. Some of us aren't sure we're going to be okay. And that does connect for me with this larger theme of the book, to the extent that it's even possible to generalize about a book that has so many diverse perspectives. I read this as a collection about fear and hope, as those feelings relate to one's own sense of self. So a lot of the poems seem to turn on that movement from anxiety about who we are, anxiety about oneself, and then turning towards or trying to find the language for a celebration of the things that we may be actually afraid that we are.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I would, a lot of the collection is trying to celebrate things that I and a lot of my friends were afraid that we were for a while, right? Things may be different if you are, currently 12 and lucky. But I think every trans person who's my generation spent some time being afraid that we were trans. Because we were told either that we'd face vicious discrimination, which frankly I have not, but many, possibly most of us do, or that we'd have to go through expensive, unpleasant, and time-consuming medical procedures, which is a whole other conversation, or just that we'd lose friends, right? Or loved ones, or jobs for some of us. Again, I've been extremely well treated, but many of us have not been. So yeah, celebrating the thing that you were afraid that you were, and being anxious about how things will turn out. And, Yeats says he's trying to hold reality and justice in a single thought. Auden says poems are the clear expression of mixed feelings. One of the things I want to try to do as a writer and like as a human is to be able to celebrate things that still make me anxious. And, like probably many of us in the audience, like I have a diagnosed anxiety disorder. I take medicine for it. I have a lot of catastrophizing, and I think a lot about terrible things that could happen, some of which are quite unlikely, some of which are probably going to happen, right? Some of the world's great cities are going to be swallowed by the ocean in the next 100 years, and the people who live there will have to go somewhere else. If you just say some and you don't give a number, that will happen. But if you live in Boston, where I live, or San Diego or London, you don't actually know whether you're in for it or not. The jury's still out on a lot of that stuff. You don't know. And it's okay to love those places and to celebrate and work for their continuation, and to know that some places and some people are not going to be okay. And that's, I'm using climate change as an example familiar to, I probably hope everyone on this call. But if you have, let's say 10 friends who are struggling with serious personal difficulties,
Mhm.
Some of them are going to be okay and some are not. And you don't know and you can't know. And if someone's and part of a lot of what this collection is about is the more we support each other, one another, and the more we just kind of try to show up for one another as the sort of weirdos we all are, the better our chances get. But it's never 100%. You know,
Well,
the
and
expansion keeps getting destroyed, and usually it's rebuilt.
well, one of the things that I like about the way you're approaching that challenge of celebrating difference across the collection, across this collection, is that you know, it's simply it's easier said than done. Once one acknowledges just the possible varieties of difference, and I'm using this as a sort of a segue into what I think are some of the most interesting explorations of identity in the book, which is the several poems that speak from the perspective of units of punctuation. So that you have, you know, poem in the voice of quotation marks, a poem in the voice of an em dash, a poem in the voice of a semicolon, and so on. These are, I just think this is a wonderful, almost metaphysical conceit in terms of a way of articulating forms of identity that we're all potentially familiar with, but are very much not human, that are entirely symbolic
Yeah.
categories of identity. And I wonder if I could invite you to read one of those poems.
Sure.
I really like the semicolon one, but if you have a
Sure.
favorite, then any of those.
No, there's a whole story behind those. I don't know if Nicholas Nace is on this call. Nicholas? No? Okay. Well, if you know his work, he edits or co-edits the Hamden Sydney Poetry Review. And they did a whole special issue a couple of years ago on punctuation and asked me if I had anything lying around. So I wrote like 9 poems spoken by punctuation marks and, you know, published the ones I liked. Nicholas has been really wonderful supporter of a whole lot of work. I have to find the semicolon. It's on page. It's, where is it? I've lost it. I dropped it. It's on page 75. So it's a whole series, and yeah, there are some of I'm afraid too many poems I've written that are spoken by non-human objects, which I love writing those poems because you can't culturally appropriate, you know, a flashlight or an electric torch or an otter, or, you know, a block of ice. You can make them speak for you. And then you may be seeing links to Donne in here. You are welcome to go there. I think about Donne a lot. Donne and Marianne Moore are some of the people I think about the most now. Not that I am them, alas. Anyway, it turned out that every one of the punctuation marks that I gave voice to and was happy with the result was a different kind of trans or queer label. Semicolons are, of course, non-binary. But if you identify with and like the semicolon and your pronouns are, then are your pronouns he, him? Or they're not? They are?
He, they.
Oh, okay. Great. Okay. Then you automatically get to be a semicolon. I'm glad that I asked. I've seen you referred to as he, him in print, but that's you get to be a semicolon without even having to have exceptions made for you. I mean, really, anyone can be a semicolon, but it helps if you've got a they somewhere in your sense of yourself. Now I feel like you should read it, but I mean, do you want to, or should I read it?
I would love to hear you read it.
Okay, semicolon. Neither one thing nor the same thing all the time. I am the punch lines of jokes about copy and type, the mark of least use, the maiden aunt of punctuation. I feel at home in old forms, amid dust and clutter, akin to the moths whose wings show my outline. No good in a crunch. Educated kids forget my name or try to turn when, if ever, they would choose me into a game. I am also accused of harboring ambitions above my station. I am still figuring some of that out myself. I know, though, that I was made to join together things formerly thought incompatible, to be neither nor and both and, to seek a connection that does not amount to copulation. In Greek, I simply indicate a question. That's true. I always keep one eye open. I know what I've seen. My siblings in arms include the tractor trailer, platypus, lungfish, merfolk, and seaplane. When challenged about my right to exist by some precocious reader or editor who makes my deletion into a helpful suggestion, I once allowed myself to be struck out. Now, however, I will more likely assert that I have been around for centuries, long before anyone asked me to explain. Right. I always feel a little odd when I read that poem because I wanted it really the terminal rhyme should be on out and doubt and about, and it just that's how it should be, but the poem wouldn't let me do that. And I should also add that it really is in Greek a semicolon. It works like the way the question marks do in most languages that use the Roman alphabet, and that the old forms there, that is an obscure pun because they are FORMES, which refer to the trays or metal containers used by old-fashioned typesetters. Whitman would have known about them, as well as to, poetic forms and stuff.
Yeah, it is the history of the semicolon is it's one of the it's a Renaissance era unit of punctuation. I think the first person people usually attributed to its use in English is Ben Jonson, which is a nice, nicely sort of, and I'm sure it was a very punctilious use.
Also the first poet in English to consistently title his own short poems.
Yeah. This is and first in a lot of, he needed that category of authorship to, in a way, it shores up his own ideas about identity, right? Johnson is somebody for whom being an author is probably the thing that stopped him. Well, definitely the thing that stopped him from getting
being
hanged.
executed. Yeah. Yeah.
It's an extraordinary life. Starts out, a bricklayer's son who is branded on the thumb and only not hanged at Tyburn because he could recite his neck verse, who ends up as a poet laureate with a pension from James I. It's a fabulous arc. But the semicolon, at least in English, may originate there if we are to trust some of those authorities. But I forget which poet I heard this story about. Maybe you will know, Stephanie. So I want to say Archibald MacLeish, but I could be wrong about this. Apparently having a dream towards the end of his life of a giant gold semicolon, and he could not understand why he was having this dream. And then it became clear to him that, of course, it's the unit of punctuation that connects one complete but finished unit of thought to another complete sentence. So basically, it's the gateway between death and whatever comes after. Is how he chose to understand it.
Wow.
Yeah, isn't that cool?
Yeah, I've never heard that story. And I have just Googled, just tried to find out by Googling some words, and I'm not seeing it.
I Googled it, and what I found was a lot of references to other kinds of semicolon symbolism in the culture, like of course, there's the mental illness association, the tattoo, and the association with a kind of
people who have survived attempts to end their lives. I did not know about that association until the poem was published and out in the world, which is probably good because I don't know if I would have let it out in the world. But there actually are poems about suicidal ideation in this book, and that is actually something that I think about and have experienced, although not recently, and want to sort of help people with. But this is not one of those poems.
No, this is about that notion of
okay, sorry.
The thing that is that would appear to be complete in and of itself, but then discovers that it actually must be connected to something else.
Oh yeah,
and that is the I think that's where your sense of it as the non-binary punctuation comes from, right? It's the connection between. Well, you have the line in the poem, which now
I mean, it's visually non-binary. Is it a colon?
Right.
Is it a comma? It's two things at once, and
right.
people think they don't go together, but they do when you're a semicolon. It's kind of like mermaids. I mean, the semicolon is also the mermaid-shaped punctuation.
Your line here is hard to improve on, right? I was made to join together things formerly thought incompatible, to be neither nor and both and, to seek a connection that does not amount to copulation. I think that's just, and there are so many areas of it. It doesn't even necessarily have to be a claim about identity for that to really ring true for me. People are constantly asking me, how do you go from 17th century poetry to comic studies, as if these things were and
they're very closely connected.
Yeah,
they're obviously connected. And I mean, it's hard for me to make a direct connection between mainstream comics and the poetry of George Herbert, although you could do it. But if from Donne or Milton, it's quite easy.
You got to, well, you've got to say more, although I'm going to invite you to actually read. You do have this poem on transliterature, your introduction to transliterature. I was going to ask you to read that one last and do some superhero poems first, but given the direction of our conversation, maybe we should just jump to that one.
No, let's do superhero poems first.
Okay. Then we'll
that one's a bit longer.
Around to the connections between poetry and comics and transliterature in our final move here. In that case, do you want to read the Plastic Man meets Reed Richards?
Yes. Did you have a panel? Did you have a Jack Cole panel you wanted to share?
I do. I have a couple of slides I could show here of the. 1 second. I'm going to try and share my screen if I can do that. So what I found here was just one of my. Oh, that's not. Is that sharing?
This poem was written for one of Douglas Wolk's birthday events. If Douglas is still on the Zoom. Hi, Douglas.
Yeah, Ben, it did come on for a second, and then it went
okay,
away.
I'll try that. Yeah, I'm trying that again. Hang on a sec. It's being. There we go. There you go.
Okay. Oh, that's great.
I chose that one because of the where Woozy is grabbing Plastic Man, and the expression on his face is just too delightful. But it's a typical Jack Cole. There's always something more clownish and pratfallish and about Plastic Man, and this is sort of whereas Reed, of course, Reed Richards is your although he has a potentially ridiculous power, somehow never is as ridiculous as Plastic Man.
Yeah. The sort of core of this poem is that they have the exact same superpowers, and two people or multiple people can come into the world with the same gifts and the same tastes, and the world is just super unfair because time and chance happens to all things, and because capitalism, and because institutions treat people unalike. And Plastic Man is almost proverbially ridiculous, and he was a thief before he got his powers. He's someone who's always of low social status and is often embarrassed. And Reed Richards, who has the same stretchy powers and was created something like 10 years later, is someone who appears to sort of have everything. He is one of the only consistently successful, by certain terms, or at least stable examples of how to be a married adult with kids in the main Marvel universe. And his inventions at least sometimes work, and he's respected. Plastic Man meets Reed Richards in heaven. Everything seemed to be within your reach. Sex, gadgets, wedding rings, clouds, the roofs of Midtown. Expert stretcher, gentle landlord, paterfamilias, best pal of pilots with a PhD in confidence. You found an occasion to teach in every skirmish. Conservation of mass was never a thing for you, who had it all. The leading man, the man who understands. You had my powers. I had no belief in myself. No wonder I turned myself into a chopper, a bedspread, an egg, a red rubber ball. Whatever writers wanted me to be. Of course, I used to be a thief. Of course, I'm always joking. If I meant what I said, somebody could pin me down. I remember when there was nothing in my hands.
It's it got me. There's a pathos for Plastic Man there that I have never. It never occurred to me before, and I will never be able to think about him now the same way.
Oh, he's the great sad clown of all of comics.
I think that is an insight that I had missed, but that now wonder how I had missed it. And of course, there was an element. I mean, there's a tragedy to Jack Cole, the larger arc of Jack Cole's life too. Of course.
Oh
that,
yeah.
That might explain to some degree why that was always there. I think in some ways you already sort of contextualize it perfectly, but there are several superhero poems in this in the volume, and we also have some other images that we could share with people. Do you want to do the Kitty Pryde poem?
They're all Kitty Pryde poems, Ben. Yeah. Every single one of them. If you want to share an image, I'll read one of the Kitty Pryde poems. Which one did you mean?
I was thinking the pirate.
Okay. That's fine. That's fine. And there's also Before the Wedding.
But, oh right, okay.
Yeah.
That's the Sappho.
Yes.
Fragment. Oh, I hadn't caught that, but now that makes sense.
Really? Did you?
I had. Okay. So it's Colossus is no, that's not Illyana Rasputin. I guess I was reading that all wrong.
Oh no! Oh no! You may. Do we need a brief tutorial on Kate Pryde's love life here?
Oh, I think it would. Yes, absolutely. Let's do that. I'll share my screen and show some images, and you absolutely please do that.
Okay. Okay, I feel like Ben just knows so much about so much comic stuff, and we just happen to be in my rabbit hole here with my OTP. So during here, so this is Kitty Pryde, who now goes by Kate, but was Kitty for a long time, and she was designed as a figure of identification for younger readers of X comics, in particular younger readers who might be girls. Who were reading X comics during the late 70s and early 80s in greater proportion than girls were reading other mainstream superhero comics, partly because there was so much good representation by the standards of the time. And of course, some of the girls who were reading X comics religiously did not know we were girls, but now we know. And she's got a whole lot of aspects that drew readers to her and that drew me to her. She's Jewish. She's really good at school. She's always kind of awkward. She has an easier time relating to adults than to her peers. And she wants to be popular. And she has a certain amount of what we now call passing privilege, the ability to fit in and not be rejected out of hand the way other Marvel mutants often are. And that goes with her power set because she is able to physically pass through a variety of solid objects, and I think about her a lot. She's also bisexual. I don't headcanon her as trans, although some of my friends do. Her powers, of course, are about being able to transmit yourself through different things and being able to pass. So they're a wonderful trans allegory. This is a very important panel from a much later comic, X-Men Gold number 30, written by Mark Guggenheim and drawn, I think by, oh dear, it's not David Baldeon, is it? It's who is this artist? Can someone look it up? I want to say David Valdez, but that's wrong.
Yes, let's see. Oops, sorry.
No. Here, I'll get the artist's name. It's very important to credit artists and not just credit writers with major comics. The artist for that, it's David Marquez. That's it, not Valdez. Marquez. Yeah, it's really a great job of penciling. Katie has had an off-again, on-again romance for most of her life in comics with that's very explicit with an older, just a few years older Russian mutant named Pyotr Rasputin, Colossus, and they're very cute together, and they're very stormy, and he's kind of a meathead who's very self-sacrificing. And in this story arc, he saves her from being killed by space aliens, and in return she agrees to marry him, which is what he's wanted for a long time. If you know how to read between the lines of comics published in the 80s, you notice that Kitty, for a lot of those times, was basically in love with her roommate Ilyana Rasputin, or Rasputina, who was also a mutant with a very complex backstory involving demons in limbo. They were clearly gal pals. They were best friends. They were, depending on how you read it, either actually dating or in that situation that so many of us queers have been in, where you have a giant crush on your best friend and you don't want to ruin the friendship, but really, you know, you belong together in this way that you just belong together. So many fans would rather see Kitty and Ilyana together than Kitty and Ilyana's older brother Pyotr together. And indeed, what happens in this story, and this is a major spoiler, so if you're waiting to be surprised by X-Men Gold number 30, maybe turn off your mic for about 30 seconds and then come back. Kitty and Ilyana have an anguished conversation in which it becomes clear to Kitty that Ilyana doesn't think it's a good idea for Kitty to marry her brother, which it is absolutely not. And that is a very similar situation to the situation in not the oldest surviving lesbian love poem, but the most famous surviving lesbian love poem from classical antiquity, which comes literally from a lesbian, a native of the island of Lesbos, Sappho. It's Sappho's poem number 31, in which Sappho looks at the woman she's into and sees that that woman is really into a guy and would really like to change places with the guy without offending the woman she's into, and just a lot of feelings ensue. So this is a version of Sappho 31 that is spoken by Ilyana at the wedding of Kitty and Pyotr, which does not in fact take place. And if you are an X fan, it is strewn with catchphrases. And if you are what people call a receptionist, someone who studies the reception of the poetry of classical antiquity, you will recognize some liberties and some fidelities that I've taken with this text that's been translated so many freaking times. And mostly when I translate and adapt from the only languages that I use, which are Greek and Spanish and French, I try to pick poems that haven't been translated to death, but this one is super famous. And so I kind of pinned it to my favorite fictional couple. Before the wedding. That man you're standing next to. For so long, I looked up to him like a god. You were immured in conversation. And when he smiles back at you now, my heart skips, and not for him. Tonight, I need armor to look at you. When I want to tell you how we should be together, no human language comes out. I have known this feeling that warms, then scalds me before. When you and I touch, it's the best and the worst. I'm brittle tin. I'm paler than drought grass. I shake, my eyes turn black, and I can't see you anymore. And yet I do. I am going to survive this experience, even if it's like coming back from the dead. Still, I wish I could be taking your hand now, even if my horns and tail would show. Let's go upstairs for a minute and look at the moon. And there's all kinds of Easter eggs there. Those are not proper Sapphic stanzas in terms of syllable counts, but the full stanzas do have 5 syllables at the end of in each terminal line, which proper Sapphics do. Welcome to the X-Men. Hope you survive the experience is a well-known catchphrase. For those who know, Ilyana has actual armor when she's using her powers, as does Pyotr, although they're different kinds of armor. And Ilyana famously has, in fact, coming back from the dead. So she would know what it's like to come back from the dead. And like many of us queers in the world of X-Men fandom, we are willing to wait for this couple to get together, but we are perhaps going to be waiting indefinitely, because that's what it's like to be the fan of a corporate property where an A-list character is beloved by a lot of powerful straights.
Well, this is when you said they're all kiddie poems, I was thinking I'm actually feeling reassured now. I was thinking this was the Ilyana poem, but of course it means it's also
yes, of course it's the Ilyana poem. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Now I understand. Now I understand. Yeah. This is I know there are a couple of there's at least one classicist in the audience who I'm sure will really have appreciated what you just did with that.
Yeah, no, I have a really unhealthy relationship to the character of Kate Pryde. I have long had the feeling that the things that happened to her in comics happened to me. This is not a relationship that I recommend that critics have to anything. Although Rita Felsky, who's probably not in the audience, but if so, if not, she's great, read her books. Rita Felsky has written movingly about identification as something that just happens to you, and like Cthulhu, it picks you.
Now, well, at this point, you have to read Song of Kate the Pirate Queen.
Okay. Yeah, Kate is no longer an assistant head of school or a head of school or figure for youth identification in the same way. Instead, she is the captain of you'll see, Song of Kate the Pirate Queen. I used to be the most relatable gifted child the world had ever seen, in my Yoda sleep shirts and point shoes. Come at me, I'd take it. I used to be everyone's sweetheart. Now I'm a brass-buckled, leather-booted pirate queen. I used to hold newcomers' hands. We could hit the mall if you were sad, and if you were mean, we could fix that with ice skates, cocoa, and pie. I'd bake it. I used to be the most relatable gifted child the world had ever seen, though I preferred circuits to circle skirts. You could sit me in front of any cathode ray terminal console, futuristic machine, or robo Nimrod, and I'd neutralize, rewire, reprogram, or remake it. I used to be everyone's go-to girl for tech support. Now I'm a scarlet pirate queen. I was the acceptable face of the unaccepted, sweet politic gaze on a screen, proving any of us was like anybody else because I had taught myself to fake it. I used to be the winsomest, wide-eyed, gifted child the world had ever seen. I stayed in school till I could run the school, and strangers still believed I was 15. I still like equations and costume closets, but now I love my sloop and the hungry wake it leaves on the froth of the open ocean, now that I'm an implacable privateer queen. If growing up means dying, I've died, and then some. I came back sharp, crisp, and clean. I'm trusting enough. You can fool me once. I'd rather ignore a barrier than break it. I used to be everyone's confidant, first crush, best friend, transparent like you've never seen. I used to be responsibility. Now I'm your bare-knuckle, blades-drawn power politics, bisexual pirate queen. So yeah, that's a thing. And it's, it's full of puns. I did, in fact, stay in school for quite a long time, and now I help run the same school. So, there's a whole bunch of X-Men at the Mall tropes from the 80s that you may be familiar with. Stop talking.
No, it's a real tour de force, this one. But it's also I particularly like the line about strangers still believed I was 15. Yeah. I thought that was a really nice way of thinking about sort of one of the great problems of long-running serial fictions. The Kitty Pryde was introduced as Kitty and as a child, and has had this developmental arc, but it's a developmental arc within an endless serial fiction, which nobody else can get too much older, right? So her aging within a world where everybody else stays kind of the same age they were when you met them, presents an interesting writerly challenge. It's a classic challenge of long-running serialization. And I love that you've seen sort of the need for her. What this poem does, in other words, is it isn't just, to the degree that there's a subgenre of superhero poetry, and it's usually the hero as icon speaking in the form that we always recognize. Mm-hmm. But here you've really, you've nerded out here. This is like the long arc of a character's development. Who knows how long Kate stays Kate the Pirate Queen, right? Before somebody hits some reset button. This is
I know.
So yeah, I guess this is the danger of there's I don't know if there's a question there or just a bunch of observations about the challenge of thinking about characters whose development within the long arc of a serial fiction is inevitably fraught. But
there's a couple of challenges there. That one, if for the people who are in this call who are theory of the lyric people, we can talk about how as Jonathan Collar and Alice Fulton and a couple other people like to say, lyric is supposedly about what happens now, and narrative is about what happens next, and this is a lyric or semi-lyric attempt to encapsulate a story up to this point, and the story is going to go on. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I love about the X comics that I love, and you can see this with in other stories, to mainstream stories to a lesser degree. You see it in some Teen Titans stories, if there are DC people in the audience. The Teen Titans are great. There are a lot of good DC comics. We'll see. We can do this again. The next book will be all about the Legion of Superheroes or something, although there's already a rather good poetry book by Raymond McDaniel that's about the Legion of Superheroes that you probably have. Anyway, X characters were designed to grow and change and eventually age out of being superheroes. They're often not permitted to by, upper management, but they are supposed to change, which they do, and sometimes retire. And the teenagers eventually grow up and get replaced by other teenagers and become the next generation of adults. And I love it when superheroes are permitted to age and change and make different decisions, however slowly that happens relative to those of us who age in real time. And of course they age slower than we do, because superheroes only get 12 issues of their own comic at most a year, except for Wolverine. He doesn't age. He gets 500 issues a year, but he doesn't age. superheroes, of course, that, you know, you can write a different story about your life every day. But if you're in a comic book, you get fewer chances. And so it's okay with me that they age more slowly, but I do very much want them to age. And I dislike the kind of canon reset that keeps people the same age forever. I don't like that. The Raymond McDaniel book, hang on, I'll post a link. It's called Special Powers and Abilities. He's also got one poem in his book, The Cataracts, which you can find by using Google Books, but I recommend you just buy the damn book. Hang on. A poem called Destiny and Mystique. That's a very, very good X poem. About Destiny and Mystique and getting the crap beaten out of him as a teen, which, you know, very fortunately, I was not physically in danger for being weird or nerdy or queer or a girl as a teen, but many people like me were, and I think, you know, Ray was, but that's his Legion of Superheroes book. I've written about it. It's lovely. It's very strange.
This question of age of superheroes and aging, different angles on it, but I do think it's that question of it's one of the things that I love about this poem is that you are we're allowing these characters who we may encountered in one way when many of us were young. I was probably 13 when I first encountered Kitty Pryde.
She was 13.
Yeah. I think it's about, I think we were the same age. And so Kitty becoming Kate, it's a long arc that, and in some ways long overdue, but it's a thing that many of us have wanted. I think people who met her then have wanted this for her. But there is also a way in which, when you're dealing with very pulpy material, characters who are sort of, I think this is my theory for why there have been so many Robins at this point, right?
Yeah.
Batman can't develop. If he were to develop, it would mean the end of the franchise. It's very important in many ways that Batman doesn't grow, because then his project becomes self-evidently deranged and impossible. So Batman has to stay the way he is, but somebody has to grow. So you have this series of surrogate children who come into his orbit, and have like the weirdest stepdad ever, basically. And they all then have this sort of forking path in terms of breaking away from him. So Dick Grayson with his I'm different from him now. I'm not Robin anymore. Yeah, I'm Nightwing and I fight crime at night. I'm kind of like him, but I'm not like him anymore, and I'm not Robin anymore. Versus the just twisted and turned bad by the experience.
So, I mean, a couple things. I want to, let's see. Here we go. I think you're right about Batman. It's notable to me that the people I know who are Bat fans mostly don't care about Batman, although there are important exceptions. They care about the other characters around him, like Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy and Batwoman and Oracle, who do grow and change. And I feel like we can get right back to these archetypes. But while we are on the subject of creating these characters and figuring out which ones can grow and change, I feel like I should remind the audience that if you want to hear me and others create and play with superheroes on a near weekly basis, there's now a podcast where we do that with role-playing games. And there are a whole bunch of poetry in jokes on that one. And if you're enjoying the poems here and you do listen to podcasts at all, I would feel irresponsible if I didn't let you know that we have a podcast called Team Up Moves, which, Fiona Hopkins, who is our sound engineer and producer and GM, and I have been investigating different kinds of universes and superhero creation systems. And it's starting to feed back into the poems I'm working on now.
We are at the top of the hour, Stephanie, and as much as I'd really wanted you to read Introduction to Trans Literature, I'm wondering if we should indulge, if the audience has questions, if anyone would like to ask a question, this might be the time to take a few minutes for that, since I know that people probably going to have to want to go on with the rest of their evenings, but
Yeah.
perhaps there's time for one or two questions.
Right.
Yeah, we can.
Thank you, Ben, for that
Yeah.
transition. Because as much as we'd like to enter the comic book world of timelessness, that is not our fate. So I do welcome, first of all, thanks so much for this rather amazing conversation. And if people want to either unmute and ask a question or put I mean, there's only about 14 of us, and I think we're a trustworthy bunch. Then they can comment or either way in the chat or unmute.
Also, I want to recognize that some really esteemed people are or have been in this conversation, some writers I really admire.
Ben, I'll ask a quick question, and I guess part of it is my guilt complex for not mentioning your academic study on comics, and really comics and morality, about do gods wear capes? And I mean, that's sort of an issue that somehow the conversation has avoided, you know. Is there some way, Stephanie, that is there a morality or religion sort of thematic or thread for you in your collection, We Are Mermaids?
Oh, I mean, I am close to a number of people who are very spiritual and very interested in religion, and I like listening to them talk about religious and spiritual topics. I don't quite go there in the same way. I'm certainly, a Jewish woman. I am connected to Jewish culture, and there are Jewish poems in all my books, although, maybe not a ton of them. There's certainly a lot of ethics, a lot of like, what do we do? What do we owe each other? How do we square our obligation to ourselves and our own feelings, and not to sort of, closet ourselves or repress ourselves with the responsibilities that we have to others? I think that's something that probably many or most parents think about. And I've got a whole lot of poems. There's one, maybe the saddest or the happiest or something, that's spoken by a bunch of airplanes, about what the airplane should do about all the humans who want to be passengers. And that at the time was a poem about, how can I be part of this international fan community and queer community that wants things from me that I want to give, and not blow off the children and the sort of cis humans and the sort of non-fanish humans that I already love and that I already have obligations to. So I hope there's a lot of ethical thinking, and there's the trappings of religion, but I'm probably not the poet you want to go to if you want a real sense of the divine. Sorry.
No, there are a lot of attempts. I think there are a lot of attempts to imagine perspectives other than the human. I think that's my way into that. And indeed, I think that's one of the great things about this collection, and it's not unique to this collection, of course, Stephanie. It's a big part of it's something that you do in a lot of your work. And
I hope so. Yeah, there's a lot of that in the last book, Advice from the Lights. This is going to turn into a conversation about Machine Man and Robot Man and like Red Tornado, and there's some DC content for you. Let's talk Red Tornado.
Well, what we need to do is have an opportunity to have a much longer conversation to really get into the short boxes. But
yes,
I'm again, maybe just want to open the floor to anyone else in the audience before we allow people to. I don't know if some people are dialing in from the East Coast, some from the West. It's already probably getting quite late for some people out there. But if anyone has another question for Stephanie, this is perhaps your chance to ask it.
Do. If that is if we have none, we can close, or I can read Introduction to Transliterature as a kind of outro.
Please read that as I really wanted to get to that, so maybe we can end with
Sure,
that.
let's do that. Thank you. Thank you so much, Stephanie, and thank you as well, Ben, for leading Stephanie through such a wonderful conversation.
Oh, okay. 1 second. Okay. Introduction to Transliterature, and it's got two. Should I read both the epigraphs?
I think you have to. Yeah.
Okay. It's got two epigraphs, and you will see the relationship between the epigraphs and the poem itself once you hear it. But the first epigraph is a frequently quoted bit of Frederick Wortham's infamous 1950s book about how comics were seducing our youth and making our youth gay. And the second is from the modern, very prominent and wonderfully so comic scholar, Hilary Shute. And I feel like we're acknowledging people's written work. Kelly Sue DeConnick, should we acknowledge yours? There's at least one major comics writer in the audience here. Matthew, can you can you post some links to some great Kelly Sue DeConnick comics?
I can try my best.
Wait. Kelly Sue DeConnick says don't. Okay.
Oh.
We will respect your wishes there, but okay. One of those names where if Kelly Sue DeConnick has written a comic, I buy it. Introduction to Transliterature. So the two epigraphs. This is from Frederick Wortham's Seduction of the Innocent. If later on you want to read a good novel, it may describe a young boy and a girl, how a young boy and a girl sit together and watch the rain falling. They talk about themselves, and the pages of the book describe what their innermost little thoughts are. This is what is called literature. But you will never be able to appreciate that if, in comic book fashion, you expect that at any minute someone will appear and pitch them out of the window. And then this is an epigraph from Hilary Schute's book, Why Comics, which I recommend. Comics is a form about visual presence, a succession of forms that is stippled with absence in the frame gutter sequence. Introduction to Transliterature. A young boy falling and a young girl in the rain are together in a fashion. Their little thoughts pitch through them like the rain, and at any minute they expect someone you will never appreciate. This is what is called young. The rain keeps pitching down the gutters. Against the selves, the boy rubs between inner windows, talking about the presence in their little wants and the innermost rain you will never be able to describe. You may never be a girl, but you can be good if a novel in fashion describes you. Later, you appear. The boy and the girl want to describe themselves. Instead, they expect that some literature will appear to rain them out of the window. Their pages describe. You can't pitch the rain. They can only want to appear in the book of themselves, and if they sit together, they may call a window. Rain talks to the gutters. The falling boy, who may be a girl, may never be out till later. But the girl's book will be good. It will be a comic book. It may be a boy and a girl together. A girl and a rain boy and their innermost girl whose pitch is falling together, so they are all able to be young. No one pages them. No one appears to pitch them out in the rain or into the gutter they may later appreciate. There will be pictures of frames together and falling and stippled minutes and comic book windows and pages about themselves. And this is what is called literature. Oh, thank you. I'm so glad you like that poem. We have so many more conversations that we need to have. Come to Boston. I wish you're coming to Louisville next time.
That is, I really think that's a phenomenal poem. That is a poem I'm going to teach.
Oh,
I absolutely love that poem.
man.
And thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you, Matthew Bittman, for bringing us together.
And
welcome.
Brandon for
arranging
doing the voice
this.
and text stuff.
I really appreciate it. Yes, Stephanie, let's bring you out to Oregon. Let's make that happen.
Yeah. I mean, well, stay tuned.